Smoke should not have been rising from that valley. Not in winter. Not from a cabin that had been empty longer than most men could remember. Caleb Whitmore reined in his horse and stared at the thin gray line twisting into the cold Montana sky, feeling the first tug of unease tighten in his chest. He knew every acre of his land. He knew what belonged and what did not. And that smoke did not belong. He rode down through the trees, the snow growing deeper as the valley narrowed. The cabin came into view slowly, half hidden by pine and shadow. It looked older than he remembered, but not abandoned. The roof had been patched. A stack of split firewood leaned neatly against the wall. Whoever lived there knew what winter meant. Caleb dismounted and listened. No sudden movement, no voices, just the steady crackle of a fire inside. He knocked once, firm but controlled. The door opened almost immediately. A woman stood there, wrapped in a plain wool coat, her dark hair pulled back tight. Her face showed no surprise, no fear. She looked at him as if she had been expecting this moment for a long time. "I know whose land this is," she said before he could speak. Her voice was calm, measured, and clear. "And I know why you're here." That stopped him. People caught where they shouldn't be usually rushed to explain themselves. She didn't. She simply stepped aside, giving him a clear view of the cabin's interior. It was clean, orderly, sparse but intentional. A table scrubbed smooth, tools hung carefully on nails, nothing stolen, nothing wasted. "My name is Eleanor Brooks," she said. "I'm not hiding." Caleb took off his gloves slowly. Every instinct told him to assert control, to remind her that this valley fell under his authority. Instead, he found himself studying the details she hadn't bothered to disguise. The way her boots were mended, not replaced. The way the fire was banked low, efficient. This wasn't someone passing through. This was someone surviving with purpose. "You're on Whitmore land," he said at last. "Yes." "You don't have permission." "No." No excuses, no pleading. The tension settled between them like frost. Caleb stepped inside, more to keep the cold out than by invitation. The air smelled of pine and clean smoke. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, distant and watchful. "How long?" he asked. "Long enough to know winter doesn't forgive mistakes." That answer told him more than she likely intended. He walked the cabin once, slowly, taking everything in. There were no signs of disorder, no signs of misuse, just quiet endurance. Still, facts were facts. He owned the land, and she knew it. Most men in his position would have ended it there, ordered her out. Let the law or the cold finish the matter. Caleb felt the familiar pull of certainty. Rules existed for a reason. But another thought crept in, unwelcome and persistent. This woman had chosen a place everyone else had forgotten. She had kept it alive through discipline alone, and she had met him without fear. "Why here?" he asked. She met his gaze evenly. "Because it was empty, and because I needed somewhere that didn't belong to anyone who would ask questions." That answer stirred something sharp and unresolved in him. He didn't ask what she was running from. Not yet. Outside, the light was already fading. The mountains pressed in close, reminding him how quickly decisions became consequences out here. "You understand this can't continue," he said. "I do." "But you stayed." "Yes." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Caleb felt the weight of choice settle in his hands. Force would be easy. Authority was expected. But something about the order in that cabin, the steadiness in her voice, made him hesitate. He stepped back toward the door. "We'll talk again," he said. "Soon." She nodded once. No relief, no defiance, just acceptance. As he mounted his horse and rode back toward the ridge, the smoke thinned behind him, fading into the gray sky. But the image of that woman standing her ground in a forgotten valley stayed sharp in his mind. He told himself it was just a trespass issue. A simple problem with a clear solution. He didn't believe it. Caleb Whitmore did not return to the cabin the next day. He waited 3. Not out of strategy, but because he wanted to be certain his decision was not driven by impulse. Winter had a way of exposing mistakes quickly, and he did not intend to make one. When he finally rode back into the valley, the smoke was there again, steady and controlled. The cabin looked the same as before. No signs of expansion, no attempt to claim more ground than necessary. That restraint mattered to him more than he admitted. Eleanor Brooks opened the door before he reached it, as if she had heard him coming long before the horse's hooves reached the packed snow. She did not smile. She did not tense. She simply waited. "I've thought it over," Caleb said, dismounting. He did not step inside this time. "This situation needs to be settled clearly." She nodded once. "I agree." He handed her a folded document. "This is a written agreement. Temporary use of the cabin. In exchange, you work where I assign you on the ranch. No ownership implied. No permanence assumed." She took the paper and did not rush. She read slowly, lips moving just enough to show she was measuring every word. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind passing through the trees. "What happens if weather prevents travel?" she asked without looking up. "You stay put until it's safe. And if the work ends? Then the agreement ends." She turned the page. "And notice? You'll have time to prepare." She finally looked at him. "Put that in writing?" Caleb paused, then nodded. He took the paper back, made the addition with his pen, and handed it to her again. He felt something shift then, not power leaving him, but balance forming. She finished reading and did not sign immediately. "I won't accept favors," she said, "only what's written here." "That's the point," he replied. She signed. From that day forward, Eleanor worked without needing instruction repeated. She repaired fencing where the snow had dragged it down. She sorted supplies with care, marking what could be used again and what could not. She spoke little, but when she did, it was direct and useful. The ranch hands noticed her quickly, not because she demanded attention, but because she did not waste time. She arrived when expected. She left when the work was done. No complaints, no excuses. Caleb watched from a distance at first. He told himself it was oversight. In truth, he was studying the way she carried herself. Upright, focused, untouched by the uncertainty that followed most people living on borrowed ground. One afternoon, he found her repairing a sled runner, her gloves off despite the cold. Her hands were steady. "You could have asked for help," he said. "I could have," she replied, "but it didn't require it." That answer stayed with him. There was no warmth between them yet, but there was respect forming, slow and quiet. She never spoke of her past. He did not ask. Both seemed to understand that trust built faster when pressure was kept low. At night, Caleb found himself thinking about the agreement more than necessary. He had expected gratitude. He had expected relief. What he had not expected was the feeling that he was dealing with someone who viewed him not as a savior, but as a man bound by his word. That made him careful. Eleanor kept her boundaries firm. She did not step beyond the cabin's immediate ground. She did not accept extra provisions unless they were part of the agreement. When offered a warmer coat from the supply shed, she declined and repaired her own instead. Caleb noticed everything. By the end of the week, the arrangement no longer felt temporary. Not because it had grown comfortable, but because it had become stable. Each knew what was expected. Each knew where the line stood. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, Caleb stopped by the cabin again. He did not bring papers this time, only news of the next day's work. Eleanor listened, nodded, and said, "I'll be ready." As he rode away, Caleb realized something unsettled him. He had offered control. She had accepted structure. And in doing so, she had removed every excuse for him to treat her as anything less than capable. That was not what he had planned. but it was what he respected. Redwood Flats had dressed itself up for the winter fair, though the cold still ruled the streets. Lanterns hung from posts, and a long row of stalls sent thin ribbons of steam into the air. Caleb Whitmore moved through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding to faces he knew, listening more than he spoke. Town gatherings were where truth slipped out by accident. He stopped near a cider stand when two men behind him began talking in low voices. Their words carried easily in the still air. "Another parcel changed hands last spring," one said. "Clean transfer if you don't ask too many questions." The other laughed. "Nobody ever does, especially when the owner isn't around to object." Caleb's hand tightened around the cup he was holding. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He had heard this tone before. Careless, confident, certain that what was done could not be undone. A name surfaced between them, spoken casually, like it meant nothing at all. Vernon Hale. Caleb let the conversation continue, filing away each detail. Quiet deals, paperwork filed fast, widows and estates handled efficiently. When the men finally drifted off, he stood alone for a moment, the noise of the fair fading into something distant and sharp. On his way back through town, he passed the land office. Its windows were dark, but the sign above the door creaked slightly in the wind. He looked at it longer than necessary. The ride back to the valley was slower than usual. Snow had started falling again, soft but persistent. By the time he reached the cabin, night had settled in fully. Eleanor was inside, sorting dried supplies by lantern light. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression made her pause. "You went to town," she said. "Yes." "You heard something." Caleb did not answer right away. He removed his gloves, set them down carefully. "I heard a name," he said. "One that's been connected to more land transfers than seems reasonable." She did not move. Her hands rested flat on the table. "Vernon Hale," he continued. The lantern flickered. For the first time since he had met her, Eleanor's composure slipped. Just slightly, enough to notice. "I wondered how long it would take," she said quietly. Caleb waited. "My husband handled our land records himself," she went on. "He trusted paperwork, trusted the process." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes fixed on something far beyond the cabin walls. "After he passed, documents appeared. Transfers I had never seen. Signatures that looked right if you didn't know his hand." She stopped speaking, as if measuring how much truth the room could hold. "They told me it was legal," she said. "They told me to move on." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. He thought of the men at the fair, laughing, thought of the ease with which rules were bent when no one pushed back. "Why didn't you fight it?" he asked, then immediately wondered if that was the wrong question. Eleanor looked at him then, really looked at him. "Because fighting costs more than money," she said, "and I was already paying." Silence settled between them, heavy and cold. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, a reminder of how small one person could be when the ground itself was taken away. "I didn't come here to reclaim anything," she added after a moment. "I came here because I needed a place where no one could rewrite my name on a page." That was the moment the story changed for Caleb. Until then, the arrangement had been clean, a trespass resolved by structure, work exchanged for shelter, order maintained. Now, he saw the line he stood on. He could leave this as it was, let the past remain buried under snow and signatures, or he could step into a matter that did not require his involvement, but would test what kind of authority he truly believed in. "There are records," he said slowly. "If they were altered, they can be examined." She shook her head. "People like Hale don't make mistakes. They make plans." Caleb remembered the certainty in those men's voices at the fair, the confidence that came from knowing no one would challenge them. "I didn't ask you to do anything," Eleanor said, "and I won't." "I know," he replied. That night, long after he left the cabin, Caleb sat alone in his house, staring at the ledger his father had kept before him. Every entry was precise, honest, boring even. He thought about the land, not as property, but as promise. And about the quiet line people crossed when they decided rules only mattered for those without influence. By morning, the choice no longer felt optional. It felt necessary. The county land office opened late during winter, but Caleb Whitmore was waiting when the recorder arrived. He stood outside in the cold, coat buttoned, hat low, his breath steady. He had slept little, but his mind was clear. This was not a matter for anger. It was a matter for order. Inside, the building smelled of paper and old wood. The county land recorder, a careful man with ink-stained fingers, looked up in surprise when Caleb stated his purpose. Whitmore land carried weight, but Caleb did not rely on that alone. "I'd like to review a set of transfers filed 2 years ago," he said evenly, "specifically those associated with Vernon Hale." The recorder hesitated, then nodded. "That name comes up often." They worked in silence for a while. Ledgers were brought out, pages were turned, dates were checked. Caleb said little, but he watched closely. Patterns emerged quickly. Documents filed in clusters, signatures repeated with small variations, witnesses listed who had since moved on. The recorder frowned. "These entries are unusual." "Unusual how?" Caleb asked. "The signatures are consistent," the man said slowly. "Too consistent." That was enough. By midday, Caleb stepped back onto the street with copies in his coat pocket. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the town quiet and exposed. He knew where to find Vernon Hale. Hale's office sat above a dry goods store, warm and well lit. The man himself rose from behind his desk when Caleb entered, smiling as if greeting an old friend. "Mr. Whitmore," Hale said pleasantly. "What brings you into town business?" Caleb closed the door behind him. "I have questions about land transfers." Hale gestured to a chair. "I'm always happy to clarify confusion. People get overwhelmed by paperwork." Caleb remained standing. He laid the copied documents on the desk, one by one. "These signatures," he said. "They don't hold up." Hale glanced at them, still smiling. "You'd be surprised how often grief affects memory." "Grief doesn't change ink," Caleb replied. The smile tightened, but Hale's tone stayed smooth. "Now, let's not turn this into something unpleasant. Everything here was filed legally." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "The county recorder disagrees." "That did it." Hale's smile faded, replaced by calculation. "You're a practical man," he said. "You understand how these things work. Land changes hands, people move on, no harm done." "There is harm," Caleb said, "and it's documented." Hale exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Very well. If there's an issue, it can be corrected quietly." "That won't be necessary," Caleb replied. "The correction will be official." By afternoon, they stood together in the county office. The recorder reviewed the evidence again, slower this time, his jaw set. He checked signatures against earlier records, compared dates, noted inconsistencies. "On this deed cannot stand," he said at last. "It will be voided." Hale laughed softly. "You're making a mistake." The recorder did not look up. "No, sir. The mistake was already made." Hale turned to Caleb, his voice still polite but sharp now. "You could have let this go." Caleb met his gaze. "So could you." The decision was filed. Notices were prepared. The land was returned to its rightful standing. There was no shouting, no raised voices, just the quiet sound of authority being restored. Outside, Hale stopped at the door. "You think this makes you a hero?" he said lightly. Caleb shook his head. "No. I think it makes things accurate." Hale studied him for a moment longer, then turned away. His confidence finally cracked. As Caleb walked down the street, he felt no triumph, only weight. Justice done through paper and process did not erase what had been lost, but it set a boundary, one that could be pointed to, one that could be defended. That evening, he rode back toward the valley as the light faded. He did not stop at the cabin. Not yet. Some things needed to be settled before words were spoken again. By the time the first wagon of lumber reached the ridge above the valley, the snow had begun to soften under the sun. Winter was loosening its hold, slow and careful, the way it always did in the high country. Caleb Whitmore rode ahead of the small crew, guiding them to a rise that overlooked the trees and the narrow strip of land below. From there, the valley could be seen clearly, but it no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like ground that could endure. Eleanor Brooks stood a short distance away when he arrived, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching the men unload beams and tools. She did not ask why they were there. She waited. "This is higher ground," Caleb said, stopping beside her. "Better drainage, more light." She followed his gaze. "It's a good place," she said. He handed her a folded document, smaller than the first, but heavier in meaning. "This is a work contract. Paid position. Regular terms. Housing provided while you're employed. Everything spelled out." She opened it, reading the way she always did, carefully, without rush. The sound of hammers echoed behind them as the crew began setting posts. "You're not offering charity," she said. "No," Caleb replied. "I'm offering work." She nodded once. "Then we're aligned." She signed. The cabin rose over the next weeks, plain and solid. Eleanor worked alongside the crew when her duties allowed, carrying boards, measuring cuts, marking lines. She did not direct. She participated. The men respected that. Caleb watched from time to time, saying little. The land below remained quiet, unchanged. The old cabin still stood, but it no longer felt like the center of things. This new place did. One evening, when the work was nearly finished, Eleanor stood at the edge of the rise, looking out across the valley. The wind moved through the grass, no longer sharp, but steady. "They'll stop talking about it eventually," she said. "About what?" Caleb asked. "The land. What happened." "Maybe," he said. "But the records won't." She considered that, then looked at him. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just honest. "I spent a long time believing I had lost something I could never get back," she said. "Not the land, the certainty." Caleb nodded. "Certainty is rare. But structure isn't," she replied. "That's what you gave me." He did not correct her. He did not take credit either. Some things didn't need to be claimed. When the last tool was packed away and the crew departed, the ridge grew quiet again. The new cabin stood ready, unadorned, waiting to be lived in. Eleanor stepped inside, then back out, as if testing the weight of the moment. "I'll start tomorrow," she said. "There's fencing near the east line that needs attention." Caleb smiled slightly. "I thought you might say that." As he prepared to leave, he looked back once more. Eleanor stood in the doorway, framed by the wood and the open sky behind her. Not protected, not hidden, simply present. Caleb rode down the trail as dusk settled in, the land stretching out ahead of him, familiar yet altered. He understood then that justice did not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it came with paperwork, sometimes with patience, and sometimes with the quiet decision to treat someone as capable when the world had not. Behind him, a light came on in the new cabin, steady and warm against the fading day. The valley no longer held smoke meant to conceal. It held a future meant to be seen.